Welcome everyone to today's webinar, AI and RCM, how to turn claims challenges into revenue opportunities. I'm Chris Sosa, the Copy Chief at Becker's Healthcare, and on behalf of all of us, thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I will walk us through a few quick housekeeping instructions. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation, and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. If at any time you do not see your slides moving or are having trouble with the audio, please try refreshing your browser. You can also submit any technical questions into the Q&A box. We are here to help. With that, I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers. We have Jim Bonesock, Chief Strategy and Client Officer at Asperion, and Spencer Alley, Chief AI Officer at Asperion. Jim and Spencer, thank you for being here today. I'm now going to turn the floor over to you to get us started.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Becker's for setting this up. We look forward to hopefully sharing some insights that we've gained on our journey to deploy AI, specifically related to our work that we do as a firm in denials. So I'm pleased to have my colleague here, Spencer Alley, and I will let him introduce himself.
Hey everyone, Spencer Alley here, Asperion's Chief AI Officer. I've been with Asperion for a little over 2 years at this point. My background has always been at the intersection of applied machine learning, data science, big data, AI, and real business problems, particularly in healthcare and other kind of B2B regulated spaces, financial services, et cetera. So excited to talk through some of the lessons we've learned, our approach so far, some of our results, and just share our progress with you.
Thanks, Spencer. At Jim Bonesock, I am the Chief Strategy and Client Officer for Asperion, and I've been here for about 2 years and spent the better part of my 25+ year career in revenue cycle and technology. So got responsibility for what it is we're doing as a firm and what we're building in product or what we're buying in M&A, and then how we work with our clients to bring those to bear on the challenges we're seeing in the market, and hope to partner with them and improve those. And part of it's the use of technology. So today, our goal for this is to begin to share with you what we're seeing related to denials in the market as Asperion. So a revenue cycle services, technology-enabled services firm focused primarily on denials, but also historically on complex claims. So everything from NVA to workers' comp to VA and out-of-state Medicaid. But the majority of our focus is really around denials. And so that's what we'll be talking about today. We'll also, Spencer will give a little bit of grounding and history lesson on what is AI, ML. Those buzzwords get used broadly in the market and all around other markets today. And it seems to be a wide variety of what it is that we mean when we say AI and ML. It gets used, like I said, pretty frequently. And so we'll ground you in that. And then Spencer will take us through kind of the framework we used as Asperion. We set out on our AI journey and how we thought about the business problems we were trying to solve and how we approached the deployment of the automation that we've done today, and tie that into some real world examples as it relates to denials. Broadly, what we're seeing today in the market, you guys are all seeing it if you're on the provider side, is a massive increase in the number of denials. The volume has increased tremendously over the last several years. We've got a study from Asperion that we've referenced that suggests a 22% increase in the high dollar claim denials. We've got 18% increase in outpatient denial volumes and another 13% in the inpatient side. We see a lot of denial types across Asperion and the work we do with our clients. One of the ones that we're seeing a trend we're seeing increasingly are the partial denials. So DRG downgrades, patient type downgrades, medical necessity related, length of stay, those kind of things, where The payer's not saying, I'm not paying you at all. I'm just debating the severity or complexity or the necessity of the service that you provided and the level that you're billing it at. And I think those are particularly challenging in the fact that, again, they're not zero pay, they're not full denials, but rather we're just saying I'm paying you slightly lesser. So the amount you're going after is the delta between what you originally billed it at and what's being reimbursed. And the challenge we see there is just the fact that it takes the same amount of effort and resource to go dispute the correctness of that claim as it was submitted by pulling the medical record and writing a detailed appeal letter that suggests there's evidence as to why we billed it at a certain rate. And I think those are particularly challenging. And it becomes challenging along with the staffing side of things, as staffing has clearly improved over the last 18 months, 24 months in the market broadly. But these well-trained, credentialed individuals, nurses and coders in our world, we use attorneys as well, to construct these appeal letters and to pull and review the medical record have been a challenge for, I think, the market broadly. And so we're seeing that. We're also seeing the payers beat us quite handily in terms of pace and deployment of technology today. So we're seeing it in faster denial times. We're seeing broader denials. We're seeing the rules change and their ability to deploy those rules around claim adjudication at a rate we've never seen before. And they're better capitalized. They're more concentrated. They have the talent to deploy technology, and mostly in this payment integrity large bucket, as they refer to it. And we're seeing the result of that and the backlash come in the form of this increased massive amount of denials, and particularly, like I said, the partial denials and those that are requiring clinical validation or clinically related denials. So with that as kind of the backdrop in the situation we're seeing in the market as it relates to denials, let me turn it over to Spencer and let him walk you through what is it, so we can ground everybody when we talk about AI and ML and those other automation terms. What do we mean?
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. So Jim just talked about kind of the high level context. I'm going to just ground us in some of these basic terms that I know everyone has heard kind of variants of, but maybe people don't appreciate exactly what they mean. So wanted to start there, and then we'll get into the more specifics of, what are the specific problems we've solved and how have we approached it. Artificial intelligence as a term I know has come into vogue kind of in the business world in the last few years, but really it's been around in the academic world for much longer than that, back into the 40s and 50s. And what we really mean broadly is just any kind of technology that mimics human cognitive function in one way or another. That doesn't just have to be reading or writing. It can be computer vision. It can be planning, things like Google Maps. It can be robotics, moving around, picking things up and putting them down. All of those were areas of kind of early artificial intelligence research for many years before it really made it into the mainstream. Machine learning, which is a subset of AI, is really focused on algorithms that learn patterns based on training data that they are kind of observing and learning from. So instead of a person kind of hand coding the rules, the machine learning algorithms are learning their own rules based on seeing a data set. And that comes in a lot of different kind of flavors, which we won't get into the super details of, but that's kind of how to think about machine learning broadly, is providing a data set and then an algorithm or a set of algorithms learning patterns from that data set and then predicting, how those patterns might manifest going forward. Within machine learning, deep learning is something that really started to shake up both the academic world as well as the business world starting in the 2010s, so about 15 years ago. And this is when I was just starting off my machine learning career back at PwC, leading the AI lab there. Deep learning is really looking at how we expand machine learning capabilities to a much more kind of complex problem space, particularly around images, words, text, videos, things that are kind of unstructured data that historically, machine learning has had a tough time with. And this is really when we started to get things like image recognition. Is this a cat or a dog? Or, whose face is this in your Google Photos? Those types of capabilities came with deep learning. And the latest evolution of this has been large language models, or LLMs. And this is what has really, I think, started to open up a lot of new capabilities in this space and other spaces that rely heavily on complex text-based information sources like contracts, guidelines, policies, et cetera, that historically have been really tough to work with. So large language models, ChatGPT is probably the most famous, but all the major tech companies have their own, are what we're going to be focused on in a large part here today, although we use capabilities kind of across the spectrum here. So hopefully that gives you a sense for history and what we mean by these. I'm going to jump in and just spend one more minute on this a little bit more, and then we'll jump into the specifics for us. So I kind of mentioned, what AI is and how it works. It's really about looking at patterns and then learning from those patterns. And why is it important and kind of the topic du jour now? Why are we hearing about it now? And I think there really have been kind of a few major drivers for why this is happening now and why it wasn't happening 5 years ago or 15 years ago. The prevalence of cloud computing, and particularly access to really complex computers at scale, such as GPUs you may have heard of from NVIDIA, giving everybody access to those via the cloud is a big part of this. So businesses don't have to invest a tremendous amount of money in their own infrastructure. Access to big data, so that's another piece of this. Internet scale data, whether it's Wikipedia or any kind of data that's available to train these models, either private data or public data or third-party licensed data. And then, as I mentioned, the advent of large language models, the kind of advances we've had both in computing, data, and algorithms kind of coming together to make these capabilities like ChatGPT and others available now just to anybody who wants to use them. The cost of doing that has come down and continues to come down by orders of magnitude year over year. And that's why this is becoming ubiquitous and opening up new use cases that were just not available in the past. So hopefully that gives you all kind of a sense for what we're talking about and why we're talking about it. Why don't we go ahead and jump into what this means for us? So here are a few kind of examples of use cases that we are pursuing and have pursued. And then we'll talk about kind of our approach and framework for this. But Jim outlined kind of the big challenges in healthcare for providers that firms like Aspirion try to help with. We see a lot of these automated claim reviews driving extra denials, payment variances going undetected, the burden growing, and talent being hard to find and retain. So we look for solutions to these problems across technology, and particularly with AI and machine learning. So things like scoring models to help predict which accounts are likely to yield a reimbursement versus not, so we can maximize dollars for our clients. How do we give smart kind of assistant or co-pilot-like tools to help our employees maximize the outcomes that we achieve for our clients? So kind of a human in the loop approach to giving better tools that can surface relevant information faster. How do we look at trends and then get ahead of those trends and not be kind of caught flat-footed on them, right? And then how do we, back to this point about manipulating unstructured data, how do we surface the right information at the right time from all of the myriad places in the revenue cycle where important information comes from? We're going to talk more about this in a little bit, but whether it's clinical care guidelines, payer policies, managed care contracts, medical records, there are just so many places where to make the right decision about who should pay what and how much and at what point in time. All of that information historically has been stuck in these unstructured documents. And it's only now with the advent of large language models that we're able to extract that information at scale and make it available in the workflows to drive better outcomes. So that's kind of a high level overview of some of the use cases that we that we are addressing, and we'll get more into how we've approached that specifically. Jim, anything else to add, or we can move to this first question here?
Yeah,
so,
I think we move to the first question here. I would add, I think it's been interesting to work with you and the team on the deployment of these things, not big bang, wait till we're fully end to end, have automation of an entire task, but rather to introduce these things component by component as they're developed, and linking those components together to create kind of more end-to-end automation has been an eye-opener for me. It doesn't have to be fully built and baked and tested all the way through, but just as you said, we dipped our toes, as you know, into the machine learning model world to start. Just take our historical claims and accounts and identify where patterns are. And if I have to prioritize, I get placed 100 accounts with me in a day, and I can only work 60. Which 60 should I work first to accelerate cash and get quicker turnaround? That was a good first step, right? Helped us learn a lot about the data we had and what we could do and those kind of things. But then, to your point, moving to the structuring unstructured data into large language models, that was yet another tool we provided to our end users, where they're still doing most of the work manually, but these tools help them do it more efficiently. So there were, and we'll highlight some of those things as we go through, but I think for me, as we looked at what are the various opportunities and use cases, it doesn't have to be done all total end to end, but rather it could be, you get incremental benefit along the way. And that was a huge learning opportunity for us. So you want to hit this polling question?
Yep. So, and it looks like we've got people answering already. So today in your business or your teams today, how are you thinking about using AI ML? I know it's a popular topic. So have you settled on a strategy for using this? And if so, are you thinking about developing internally, using licensed technology from software providers, partnering with service providers who themselves have access to those capabilities, or still working through your strategy on it?
Well,
We'll just give it a little bit more, but looks like we've got a lot of people who have answered already.
Yeah, we'll see what the results are. Kind of a mix, but a lot still thinking about it. So that's interesting. You know, we've heard multiple approaches as we've worked with folks making a decision and thinking about, you know, again, we're a service provider, so kind of we are paid to produce a result, and we happen to use this technology internally to do that and do it more efficiently. But others are deciding we have the resources, we have the staff, and we want to license technology to do it ourselves. And we're going to centralize a given function, and we're going to provide the tools there to help them do it more efficiently. Also a path. So interesting kind of mix of answers there. Interesting to see.
Yep. So what we'd like to do is just share more about the framework that we use in our playbook and journey. So that regardless of the approach you're taking, whether you're building it yourself, whether you're licensing technology, or whether you're working with other vendors who themselves have access to the technology, you have a framework that you can apply, which is kind of agnostic across those approaches to actually achieve real value with AI and machine learning in your teams and your business. So this is kind of a framework that has worked for us and for me in many other places. But it all starts with thinking about your strategy, but not in a heavyweight kind of take 6 months to figure it out way. More, we call it a lightweight AI strategy, which is centered on the business problems you're trying to solve. So what are the biggest pain points that are kind of motivating your leaders today in your business? And then, prioritize amongst those, what would actually make a difference if you can move the needle on it, right? So you have to start with that, and we'll talk more about use cases in a minute. And then start thinking about how will AI help, right? That's kind of question number 2. And people get this flipped a lot. A lot of people will start out thinking, oh, this is an interesting new technology, I wonder how we can use it. Instead of first thinking about what are the most important problems to try to solve, and then how can we actually approach those problems. Then getting into build by partner types of decisions, and then how are you going to measure success and over what time frame. And all of this is before you've really even touched the technology or done anything in the business. Is what are you trying to solve? What does success look like? And then how can you use AI, machine learning technology, and how are you going to actually get access to that? So if you can start by answering those questions relatively quickly, then you set yourself up for success down kind of in the rest of this framework. So after that, an important part is pilots. So a big kind of tenet for me in product management in general, and especially in machine learning, AI, and innovation, is that iteration speed matters, and learning is more important early on than the scale of the impact, but you still have to have some level of impact. So once you prioritize the problems you're trying to solve and how you're trying to solve those, pick just a small handful, 1, 2, or 3 small pilots that you would like to actually try with some kind of low risk commitment, whether that's partnering with a technology firm to try out their product, or just having 1 or 2 folks in-house who can try to make progress on something. Do something that's low risk, but that's high in learning, and then that will set you up for future success. So these pilots are really, really important. And they're also important in terms of generating buy-in and momentum across the organization and with leadership teams, because showing is believing, right? Showing is more important than telling. So if you can do some of these pilots and generate some early buy-in, then you can get the resources you need to expand the scale of those. And that's what kind of leads you to scaling those pilots and broadening your impact. So start with that small slice, and then continue to cut off more and more slices of the pie, expand to additional use cases or additional facilities, or just expanding to different dollar thresholds or whatever the case may be. Expand on those early wins, and then get into a cadence on kind of an ongoing roadmap and kind of governance structure and all those things. But I think to me, the key takeaway here is you have to start knowing what problem you're trying to solve and what success looks like, and then kind of start with as small of a slice as you can on that problem and expand from there, versus trying to solve it all right away, or just trying to apply technology for technology's sake. That will be a recipe for a much lower likelihood of success. So let's get into kind of how this has looked for us. So, we first talked about use cases and defining the problem that we're trying to solve. So Jim will talk about this in even more detail, but for us, it's all centered on how do we help our clients maximize yield on their accounts. So whether that's prioritizing the right accounts to work first, that will maximize yield. Whether that's how do we help surface the right information at the right time for our appeals specialists, our attorneys, our clinicians to make sure they can write the best letters to maximize kind of our success rate on appeals. We talked earlier about how do we predict denial trends so that we can get ahead of those trends and make sure that we're on top of those, and then can share those back with our clients to help them not with just denial management, but denial prevention in the first place. And for us, it all comes down to kind of, again, what are the smallest parts of these problems that we can cut off first and solve on those, and then how do we demonstrate that there's an actual ROI on those pilots, and then how can we make sure that we're following the rules of the road in terms of data rights, in terms of making sure we have BAAs with all of the technology and other service providers we use, in terms of making sure that our clients are fully bought in with everything we're doing. It's all important to have alignment across those things and de-risk them so that the successes we drive here can actually create real value for our clients. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Jim to talk a little bit more about what this looks like for us in our business.
Yeah, this was an interesting business problem as we looked at it. Our overall business in denials has been historically heavily focused on the use of attorneys and clinicians to overturn high dollar, complex clinical denials. So denial types that require clinical validation. So we pull the detailed medical record and identify evidence within the case that supports the level that we build it at, or that it needs to be paid at all. So that's the framing of this. It was, again, we're historically known for the use of attorneys to overturn these denials, and not because we're going to sue payers or take them to court or do anything like that, but rather attorneys are really good at dissecting evidence and supporting documentation relative to why something did or did not meet some level of requirement. The challenge we had with the use of attorneys and clinicians is they're high dollar, well-trained, generally expensive resources. So our cost to collect was relatively high in terms of the input. And in turn, the time it took to craft an appeal letter was long. And so on average, an attorney could do, or a clinician could do 2.5 appeal letters a day, just because it took so much time to cull through the medical record and find all the evidence and pull it out and compile it and compare it against the care guidelines or coding guidelines. Our overturn rate, and we get things first pass appeal attempt, we get them on the last shot on goal, third pass. But a blended overturn rate was pretty good. The challenge, though, that we saw, and we had done this on purpose, is to say, because of the high dollar of input and the low throughput, we need to limit the types of accounts or claims that we will work to greater than $10,000 in expected reimbursement. And that was just a math equation, cost of input times contingency rate on recovery and how much effort it took to recover those dollar amounts. Nobody's going to pay a 90% contingency rate. But as I stated at the beginning, what we're seeing is a massive increase in the amount of volume related to partial denials. So it's not a $10,000 flat out zero pay denial, but rather we paid it $12,000, then we reviewed it via medical record request, and we said, nope, we're going to retract that and pay you $6,000. So the delta we're going after now is below that $10,000 threshold. So as we looked at that, we said, this is not a human solvable problem. We can't just hire more attorneys and do it with the same cost of input at the same low throughput. How do we use technology to replicate and automate portions of that to make it more efficient, to increase the quality of the appeal letters and all of the evidence we're putting in them, and to speed up that process so that we can go down the longer tail of these partial denials and address that volume that's becoming increasingly problematic, where our clients are facing kind of death by 1,000 cuts. It's just increase in denials, but at a lower dollar rate and a bunch of leakage all over the place. But the amount of work we have to put in to overturn them is the same as a full-on fatal denial, for $50,000 inpatient stay. So that was the business problem we were trying to solve, and use of technology to do it. And we'll get into a little more how we did it.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. And hopefully, what you took away there as you think about that overall framework is that we are defining the business problem up front, and we're also defining success criteria, right? So we know what our baseline is for efficiency, for overturn rate, and for kind of the threshold that we can go to our clients with. And our goal and what success would look like would be to accept claims that were much lower than $10,000, to drive up that success rate and to do them faster, so that we can, again, create better outcomes for the business. So kind of the second pillar in this whole thing is data, right? So you've defined the use case, and now you need to think about, okay, for our initial pilots, what kind of data do you need access for or access to actually create kind of a real outcome to actually achieve some of that success. So for us, there's a bunch of examples of this. Claim level data is kind of the obvious one. So we work claims, right? We work accounts that are placed by our clients every day. So what are all the kind of fields on those, the 830 and the 837s that go out, the 835s that come back, that we can use to better understand those trends and predict what's going to be successful and what's not going to be successful. Similarly, clinical data, right? So not just the claim level data, but the actual medical records and the detail around what happened to that patient. Why were they diagnosed the way they were diagnosed? Why were they, prescribed what they were prescribed and underwent whatever procedures they underwent? And then what are kind of the broader payer policies, guidelines, payer provider contracts, clinical care guidelines that are around the context of this patient, right? So depending on who the payer is, depending on what state they're in, all of those things drive what's allowable and not allowable from a auth perspective, from a reimbursement perspective, all those things. And then kind of the metadata around that, right? So when did it all happen, right? What version of the managed care contract or the policies were in effect at that time? Those types of things. So those are all kind of data that we need to have access to, and we do. But some of them we've had access to in kind of our current state. Some of them we had to go and get better access to by licensing, from third parties. And some of them, are things that we had to go back to our clients and have a conversation about how that data could help drive better outcomes for them, and then set up the right feeds from Epic or whatever EMR they were on to get that data into our system. Again, always thinking about not just the quality of the data, but also making sure it's covered under the kind of highest standards of security and compliance. Our systems are high trust certified, for example, and making sure that we're following all the right HIPAA regulations to be able to use that data. So that's kind of the second in these pillars, but maybe Jim, you can speak a little bit more specifically to what we had to do to pick these up.
Yeah, and Spencer hit on a lot of those points. I mean, by nature of what we do, we get placement data around claims and ERAs and the broader account kind of dump out of the patient accounting system to create a record within our system for workflow and distribution. So we had some of it. In certain cases, we didn't have a complete set of the data elements necessary to resolve those things or to drive automation. And when doing services, you find out as you start to look at the quality of data and whether or not you have completeness of data, you realize that there are certain manual processes that we do as a business to fill in blanks in data, which are fine if you're doing it in a manual way. But when you want to start to drive automation, you quickly realize the fidelity of that data and the expansive nature of that data can be lacking in certain areas. And so you have to kind of go do the data prep exercise of where are the gaps, how do we fill them in? And as Spencer mentioned, some of it's back to working with our clients to get a more expansive data set and a standard one. But others is, no, these are third-party licensed data sets that we need. And he mentioned care guidelines and payer policies and coding guidelines. Those are things we had to go say, all right, what's the best source? Where are we getting it from today? Is that source just a text? Is it unstructured data? Do they have APIs? Don't they? Can we license it? How do we integrate it? What are the rights? All of those things. So a lot of considerations around data beyond just feeding data into a machine learning model to learn patterns. But when you're starting to try to automate a full process, you realize that there are a lot of different data plugins, if you will, or gaps you need to fill to make sure that you can kind of automate the process end to end. So it was a big learning exercise for us around where some of those gaps are. And it took a significant amount of time and resources to fill in those gaps, quite honestly. We're still working on it. We can still get better at filling in some of the gaps to further automate.
All right, so you find your use case, you have access to enough data to start making progress on that use case. So the next kind of pillar of this is platform, right? So you can't really do anything unless you have a place for that data to live that then is accessible and that you can build your solutions on top of, and then that those solutions integrate into your workflow, right? And that can look and feel like a lot of different things, right? It could be you're producing predictions into an Excel file that gets emailed to your operators, right? That's a very simple workflow that a lot of people start with, and it's a fine place to start. For us, our goal is to do this at scale and do it kind of durably and in a way that we could really maximize the impact of. So for us, we did a couple things, and I'll try not to steal too much of Jim's thunder on some of the details for us, but it really comes around the workflow platform that we've developed internally. So that's kind of how accounts get placed and routed and prioritized for queues. And then the actual AI and machine learning platform that sits under it, where we host the solutions that we've built. Again, some of those solutions are in-house machine learning models that we've built and trained. Some of them are pipelines that use technology with large language model providers. And there's kind of a range of different solutions there. But that kind of parallel platform that gives access to those types of AI and machine learning driven solutions that can then plug into that workflow tool. So how do you manage the data? How do you manage the workflow? How do you manage the actual machine learning solutions? And then ultimately the results of that, and how those go back both to our clients for better reporting and insights, and then also back into the development of those solutions so we can iterate and improve those solutions over time. Again, this kind of integration is the key consideration here, as well as what can you actually support, kind of back to the original question around build by partner. Do you have the capability of building something in-house, or do you want to buy access to a platform, or do you want to partner with someone who has their own? So those are kind of the high-level considerations, but one way or another, you need access to some kind of platform. Otherwise, the data has no path to actually create impact for your use cases. Maybe Jimmy can talk about some of our detail.
And as our environment as it started out was very much one focused on workflow and account distribution to the right resources with the right skill sets to resolve accounts. And so we've got our own internal proprietary workflow distribution tool that automates certain tasks, administrative in nature, and routes it to the right party. And so then as we thought about it, then we could plug in machine learning models relative to scoring and account prioritization. And so we could make those more efficient as a place where we did start our journey in using kind of machine learning models. But then as we went to approach this problem of how do we improve and automate the development of appeal letters for those denial types and the partial denials, DRG downgrades, et cetera, patient type downgrades and the like, how do we do that? And so the first thing we looked at and the team looked at was, how does it work manually today? So how does a nurse or an attorney or a coder in our world begin to work at denial today? And let's map out, as Spencer said, start with a very defined, what is the problem you're trying to solve and where can you drive automation? We'll first understand the manual process and how do they do what they do. And so if you think about our world as a denials factory, and we had a manual kind of conveyor belt of producing an appeal letter off the other end, is how did the attorneys and the clinicians do the work? Started again with the data and understanding, what did we send to the payer? So the 837, do we have all the right information on what we sent them and a copy of that? What did they respond with in the 835, including the CARC and the RARC details? Was it a post-payment review where they denied it for medical record request, then reviewed it, and then sent back a denial letter that said, we disagree, we're downgrading this, take back, reissuance of payment? Is there other evidence? So they gather the evidence up front and understand that denial reason. The second thing they do is say, okay, for that type of case, that DRG in particular, or this denial type in particular, what were the laws or the rules that governed that situation that we all agree on? So care guidelines, is it Milliman or interqual? Is it coding guideline related? And what are the sources of truth for that everybody kind of follows? So what were the law? You think about an attorney says, what was the situation? What happened during that situation? What were the laws that applied to that situation? And then was there evidence that we did or didn't comply with those laws within that situation? And so that's when we pull, once we understand the laws that govern it, then we say what happened in the situation. That's where we pull the raw medical record, the PDF of the clinical documentation, and review that for the evidence that supports or doesn't support how we ultimately came to a conclusion. We compile all that together into an argument, and then we format it into an appeal letter to try to make it as succinct as possible, citing the evidence, and then we send that off, right? In other cases, we need access to managed care agreements because there are policy and procedural things we can argue about how it did or didn't comply. And then lastly, as you guys know, payer policies are popping up all the time, posted on the website and changing at a frequency we can't keep up with. Do any of the payer policies apply? And for each denial type, it's different what does or doesn't apply to supporting the argument or the evidence and the pulling out of the evidence. So as we looked at that manual process, then we said, all right, how do we replicate that in our platform that automates the writing of appeal letters? That's what we call DocIQ. So we began to build each of those components. And as I mentioned before, it didn't start with an end-to-end full automation, but rather, how do we license code sets so that when you're looking at a UB, you can quickly identify codes that you don't otherwise know? Well, we just took out a bunch of swivel chair lookup work that our folks were doing. How do we get access to care guidelines or coding guidelines and make those digitally available and easily searchable and referenceable within the work we're doing? Okay, well, that took out a lot of time of finding the right policy that applied or the care guideline that applied. Then how do we structure the medical record in a raw PDF where I'm not doing control find to look for evidence and keyword searching, but rather I've indexed that so that those are all within in our viewable platform and easily searchable. All right, if I ask it questions like what was the reason for the visit, or were there abnormal test results, or who consulted on this from a physician perspective, all of those questions I ask kind of in a normal course of investigating what happened, let's go ahead and pre-ask those questions and answer them so that when somebody picks up the next case, there's basically a cover sheet on top. Well, that sped everything up too. So it was piece by piece, we began to release parts of the tool and features and functions to our end users that made the manual process just go faster. It improved the quality of their work on a day-to-day basis. It improved the quality of the outcome of the appeal as well because it had more evidence. And so then beginning to string all those together was kind of the journey that we undertook.
Yeah, and maybe I can just mention a couple of things still on platform before we move to talent here. So we had already built our own workflow platform, which we call Compass. We started off by, when we decided to go on our kind of AI journey, we started off by starting to build some of our own in-house models and build kind of a team from scratch and hired a handful of data scientists and machine learning engineers. And this kind of links into talent as well here. And then we got into realizing that to really achieve the scale that we wanted to achieve in the time frame we wanted to achieve, we needed to actually at first partner with some folks and work on some of these pilots with some other startups who are doing similar types of building similar capabilities. And then we moved into actually acquiring one of those, which we'll talk more about that in a minute. But that formed the kind of machine learning half of our platform. So in terms of, you know, the platform side for us is both are now built and maintained internally, but we actually acquired a platform that we then built off of for machine learning and AI that is then integrated directly into our workflow platform. And now we have kind of engineering teams across both that are building and maintaining the features in those platforms that, you know, do what Jim just described. We're going to take questions at the end, but I did see one there that I just wanted to address quickly. We'll talk a little bit more about results, but there's a question around kind of impact on turnaround time for these DRG downgrades. In our first 6 months of having these in production, we've seen about a 60% improvement in turnaround time, which is to say 40% less days from placement with us to payment from the payer, based on running those through kind of this AI platform. So some real results there, and we'll talk more about that. But just getting to talent here. So this is kind of the fourth piece for us. I already mentioned it a little bit, but we've got, again, identify use case, make sure you have access to the data you need, make sure you have a platform to deploy those solutions. And then how are you actually going to build and maintain those going forward? And this is where talent comes into place. And it's not just data scientists and engineers. Obviously, those are important. But it's product managers, it's designers, it's user researchers, it's the SMEs and the experts of the RCM space that actually understand how these things work and where to get that data and what you do with it. And then it's change management folks to help your current operators and current teammates think through and learn kind of how these new platforms and solutions will fit into their workflow and make workflow easier. So it's really, if you just invest in the technology and the technologists, that's just a limited solution. You actually need people thinking about how this creates real business value and then kind of shepherding that business value into reality here. And thinking about where you get that talent. Do you hire it? Do you partner with consultants or other staffing agencies? Do you, how do you drive change management and make sure that people are on board? And just generally creating a culture that is excited about innovation rather than scared of it is really important for these things to succeed. So Jim, pass it to you for a little more kind of detail on how we think about our talent mix.
Yeah, and I think an important point that you brought up is we did the build by partner. How do we go about doing this? And I think credit to Spencer and some other leaders in our organization even before I started that had started pilots and hired a couple of key folks onto the team, but then had started these partnerships and pilots and say what is the capability and who is best positioned to solve this problem. And then for us, it was an acquisition of, and I think, the platform was part of the acquisition, but the talent that we got there was a big part of the acquisition for me, is that team and that team working together and the knowledge that we gained by acquiring that company was huge. And they had been around for 5 years and had built kind of technology for technology's sake and an amazing platform, but then kind of went and sought business problems where the technology could be applied. And what Aspirion had was a clear business problem that we could make more efficient, and access to data and these subject matter experts, as Spencer mentioned, that could guide, look, here's how the process works in a manual way. What are the opportunities to automate along the path that improve over time, but then ultimately string together for full automation. And as Spencer mentioned too, change management is a huge component to this. How do you begin to introduce that technology into the existing manual workflow to get benefit and measure the benefit and the outcome? That takes changing how people do their job today. And so that was not an easy undertaking, and it's ongoing continuously because we're continuously expanding capabilities and evolving the roadmap. And so you got to be in partnership with folks that are really adept at designing workflow and helping people train and understand how this impacts what they do on a day-to-day basis. So it's an interesting, not just as Spencer said, hire some machine learning engineers or some PhD data scientists. We've got plenty of those, but it's their ability to then translate that all the way through into the business that's hugely important and impactful. All right, we'll hit our last polling question and then wrap it up and then take some questions here in the last minutes. So as you guys are thinking about your organization and the capabilities you have, how are you thinking about, are you hiring, have you hired dedicated AI team members, technologists, machine learning engineers, other? Are you partnering with other AI specialists, firms that are doing it? Have you not decided yet, and you're still working through what your talent strategy might be. Can we attract? Can we hire? Can we retain? Do we have it internally? I think some do, which is great, and maybe just need to focus them or collapse them into a single group to be able to address these problems. And then others, it's not on their radar yet. They're just saying, I'm not real sure. I haven't invested in it. So I imagine there's, based on our first polling question, there's probably a wide variety of people at different spots within the journey. All right, give it another minute here, see if anybody else willing to respond on this, and we'll see what the group has. So similar to the first one, I think, again, kind of a similar split relative to, how they're thinking about AI generally, their approach towards it, and then where they are in terms of thinking about the talent that they need to enable that result. We appreciate you guys taking the time to answer that. So wrapping this up here, and let's get to questions. As we're looking at this, we're hopefully shared some examples of how we've thought about it, how we've approached it. I think Spencer has done a very good job of organizing our approach towards not just technology for technology's sake, but rather understanding the business problem and how it's done manually today and what the components are needed. So we are very still early in our journey as far as I'm concerned. We've got a lot of room to run and to grow and to build. But I think, broadly speaking, we've seen real improvements in efficiency and quality and throughput and, quite frankly, satisfaction of our end users and, kind of working to the top of their license and solving harder business problems and removing some of the manual steps necessary for them to, be able to apply their knowledge to make decisions. And so that journey continues. And I just would encourage you guys, as Spencer pointed out, identify where those opportunities exist within your organization, and then ask yourself, where are you going to start? And then what your approach is after that versus, hey, here's a technology, where can we apply it? I think this is game changing. I've been, like I said, doing this for 25 plus years, and I've not seen a speed of change and excitement in terms of what the power of this technology has to offer, especially large language models. Quite frankly, amazing. Some of the new agentic AI capabilities and their ability to converse and answer questions and do what they do is just mind-boggling to me. So I think the possibilities are endless, and we just got to be very clear about where do we start? Do we have the capital to do it? Do we have the capacity to take on X number of projects? And do we have the talent internally to do it? Or should we partner, or should we buy? What does that look like? But, I don't think we have a choice. I think the pace of change is happening quickly, and we need to work to adopt these things to take some of this waste out of the healthcare system broadly. So we appreciate you guys taking the time. Let's go to questions here.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, and thanks, Spencer, for that wonderful presentation. Indeed, we do have some time for questions. Thank you to everyone who's already submitted them, and if you still have a question to submit, please do so in the Q&A box that you see on your console. But gentlemen, we'll get it started with this. So the implementation roadmap shows a 4-step process as we laid out. So what's the typical time frame for an organization to move through these stages, from building a lightweight AI strategy to establishing an ongoing roadmap?
Yeah, maybe I can pick that up. So, I started here in January of 2023, and we had our first kind of solution in production, which was a kind of a scoring model by May, I think, March or between March, April, or May, if my memory is right. So basically 1 to 2 quarters is when I would expect kind of that initial pilot to be in production and creating a little bit of value. Right. And again, going back to start small and then build off of that. You want to make sure that you've got your business objectives defined, and that you understand the current state, and then you have access to data, and that you have built a solution that can exist in the workflow. So all that does take a little bit of time typically. But, in that kind of 3 to 6 month time frame for that first pilot or slice of it. When we think about kind of getting to impact at scale, for us, it was about a year and a half before we were really seeing impact that was really changing the business in a way that really showed up for kind of a broad base of our clients. And we're just continuing to build on that here. But again, a lot of that depends on the scale of your business, how much you've thought about this already versus starting kind of cold. So there's a lot of variables there that go into timelines.
Excellent. Thanks for laying that out for our audience, Spencer. Second question. You guys did touch on change management a little bit. So related to that, how do you recommend healthcare organizations handle change management when introducing AI tools to existing RCM staff who might be concerned about job security?
I can start, and then Jim, you can layer in. I think one of the nice things about being in this industry as an AI practitioner is that there are so many problems to solve, and there's so many claims that just are unworked. All right, there's so much kind of slack and waste in the system that our strong hypothesis, and we've continued to believe in this, is that we can create kind of dramatic step change types of technology leaps, and there's still plenty of work for everyone to do. That just drives better outcomes for our clients and ultimately for their patients. So there are industries where I think there will be a lot of kind of impact of AI in terms of workers. This is one where I think we have a ways to go in terms of getting to a place where we're so efficient that there won't be more ways for work to be done that creates value.
I agree. I think in the context setting of the business problem we're trying to solve, again, was remove the governor that we had on high dollar claims that require this clinical validation approach, and showing to our staff, look, there's a massive amount of volume, as Spencer pointed out, that we're unable to touch because you can't spend a week, culling through a 500-page medical record to find all the evidence. And look what the platform can do in terms of surfacing that evidence to you just to make your job more efficient, and then showing them the results. So, very much a mission-driven organization here about getting providers paid appropriately for the work that they did, and showing them that, look at our overturn rates are increasing, our throughput's increasing, the dollars we're collecting for our clients are increasing. That's ultimately lessening the burden on the patients and helping them deliver value in the communities in which they serve. So tying that all the way through and helping them understand what that looks like, and telling them, look, we want to do this. We want to do double the volume at the same number of people. It's not about, do the same volume at half the people. That was never the goal. And so that was important to point out the context and the why we're doing what we're doing. And how it impacts. So kind of delivering that message to them was important.
Thanks, gentlemen. Time for a couple more here. So this is another timeline-related question. Specifically, what kind of ROI timeline should healthcare organizations expect when implementing AI solutions for claims management? And related to that, is there a typical break-even point for the initial investment?
Yeah, so similar to the first question, but let me just elaborate on some of the considerations. So a big consideration in this field is just the payer response time, right? So there's always going to be a lag between when we introduce technology, when it's adopted by our operators, and then what that means in terms of, more and better volume submitted to payers, and then the payer kind of round trip on that coming back. So we kind of always add, 3 to 6 months to kind of expectations on timelines around ROI. The other thing I would say is ROI really depends on kind of the scale of the investment, right? So we are fortunate that we have capital partners that are really bullish on AI and believe in the AI strategy, and invested in building, in me and building out our team. They're looking for results and kind of ROI on the scale of years, not on the scale of months, which is a good place to be, because then you can really deploy things in a bigger way that really drive impact at scale. But for smaller organizations, you can have a more lean program where I think you can really actually create real impact with just a handful of people working on those solutions in a matter of months. And that part of that is actually that technology itself is being impacted by LLMs in a positive way, in the sense that it's much, much easier now to code and to put together solutions without having a giant team of engineers that you might have needed, 5 or 10 years ago. So I think ROI timelines are coming down, which is good, but there's always going to be these kind of payer timeline factors to consider.
Excellent. Now, we're a little short on time here, but I do want to sneak in a couple more questions. The first one being, is assuming AI increases RCM collections, which is what has been demonstrated, how are payers going to respond? And how will insurance companies and patients benefit from this technology?
Yeah, that one, the payers have already lobbed the first volley there relative to this investment in payment integrity. They call it broadly technology, where they're speeding up the claim adjudication rules, the edits, the application of the edits more broadly, and those kind of things. But the payers will be the first, I think, to tell you that, look, if we're contracted and we're contracted appropriately and we owe the money and it's justified based on the level of input and the care delivered and the medical necessity of that care, we will pay it. And they've got, to their own, detriment, they've got a lot of waste too in responding to appeals and auth requests and, verifying insurance and all of these administrative functions that exist over there. So I think this is a bit of a catch-up game on the provider side in terms of the exchange of information to justify the level of care delivered and the complexity of that case and to justify the payment. And there's some balancing act that has to occur in between those, the push and the pull of the payer and the provider there. And a lot of it is exchange of information and more detailed information to say, this is why the case was billed the way it was and why it was complex and why it was medically necessary and why we deserve to be paid this amount. So ultimately that does impact the patient, because if those denials occur and that gets balance billed and it becomes, part of the deductible or co-insurance amount or patient liability, certainly it impacts them that way. It also impacts communities at large. If we can't, there's no margin, there's no mission, as they say on the provider side, we have to be able to do this and stay financially solvent as healthcare providers. And to do that, we need to get paid appropriately for the amount of input relative to the care we're delivering to the community. And so I think it all flows through. It is one big, massive spiderweb ecosystem. And ultimately, I think there's probably 2 LLMs sending data back and forth and settling out a claim at some point. But we're far from that right now.
Got it. Thank you, Jim. And lastly, this will be the last question, I promise you guys. But regarding denials and appeals, what is your baseline for measuring successful pilots?
Yeah, so maybe I can just talk a little bit about how we've thought about baselines and then what kind of results we've seen so far. So for us, the baseline is always, what is our status quo today, right? And I think this is actually a trap that people fall into, is thinking that the solution they build needs to be perfect, right? And the world isn't perfect, and our operations today aren't perfect, although we're pretty good. So our baselines have to be, what do we do today? Jim showed earlier kind of some baselines around success rates and around how many appeals we can do per day for a DRG downgrade without kind of the assistance of the tooling that we built. So it was like 2.6 appeals today and, a kind of a low 30s success rate for DRG downgrades. Again, many of those are kind of aged. And then our turnaround time, based on kind of when an account is placed to when it's submitted, and then ultimately when payment has been remitted and the account is closed. We had, I don't forget the days off the top of my head, but we had a baseline around that as well. And what we've seen, again, for this DRG downgrade solution that we've been building, we've seen the turnaround time and the kind of days to cash go down by about 40% relative to baseline. We've seen the success rates go up from kind of low 30s to high 30s or even into the 40s and 50s, depending on the type of account. We attribute that to basically being able to pull together more evidence more effectively, just in that kind of amount of time. And then we've been able to lower the dollar threshold that we accept from 10,000 down to, in some cases, 5,000 or even 1,000 for some clients. Again, based on the type of cases that they're sending us. So we have seen a lot of good results. It is still actually, as Jim mentioned, quite early in our process. We are thinking about this on the time scale of years, although we are a couple of years into it. We've deployed that DRG downgrade solution last September, and we've continued to build on it across other denial types. So we expect to see more results across a broader swath of types, and then driving that into better outcomes and better feedback for our clients going forward. Anything else you would add on that, Jim?
No, that's a good explanation.
Excellent. Thank you again to you both. That is indeed all the time we have for today. Of course, I want to thank Jim and Spencer for their excellent presentation, and we want to thank Aspirion for sponsoring today's webinar. To learn more about the content presented today, please check out the resources section on your webinar console, and please fill out the post-webinar survey. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, everyone.